Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Bank of the West is offering the 1% for the Planet checking account. It gives back to the planet at no cost to you, and there's no monthly service charge with any deposit per statement. Only from Bank of the West. Learn more at bankofthewest.com/1%. Additional conditions apply. Member FDIC.
The Bachelorette
and Friends.
From first love to happy ever after.
What's that?
From dating to dick pics.
Oh my. Oh no!
The Bachelorette and Friends. Oh, I love a good dick.
This podcast contains sexual references, coarse language, and adult themes from the beginning and throughout. It is not recommended for listeners under the age of 15.
Guess what, lovers? The Bachelorette, there's always a catch, is back on stage in 2021. First up, The Mill, Adelaide Fringe Festival, from the 18th to the 28th of February, 7:30.
Tickets on sale at the Adelaide Fringe website.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Bachelorette and Friends. I'm your host, Carla Anita Mattiazzo, and today's guest is Erin Fowler. She is a dance maker. She is the founder of Tree Pose for the Planet, teacher at Qoya Love, practitioner at Eliyah Tantra School, co-founder of The Mill and Sitara Music. Welcome to the podcast, Erin.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So how do you know Callan, Erin?
Callan and I started studying at AC Arts together. So we met back in 2008 and we are dear friends. He's a very wonderful man. And so, yeah, we've been going along the journey of being an artist and all the things in between. And yeah, I did have a listen to his podcast the other day, so that was great. Just to see what he was getting me in for. He's like, you've got to talk to Carla.
So what got you into Tantra, Erin? What curiosities or what sparked that interest?
It's a very good question. It's a good thing to just drop into the conversation because you kind of see when you mention the word Tantra, people are like, giving you kind of this look of what is that, or they think, you know, there's lots of connotations that come with Tantra. Sure. I suppose it's interesting you said like first crushes to happy ever after. Like, to give some context, I was a very, very shy child and like I didn't talk to boys at school. I was like so shy, so quiet. And I suppose I found Tantra after doing a bunch of different kind of spiritual searchings, but I found that not many of them included human sexuality. And so that was where I felt quite challenged. I felt very shy, very introverted. I felt like the narratives that I'd been kind of fed by society and the expectations that were placed on me, I was like, this doesn't feel quite right. I would try and, I guess, perform what I thought was expected of me to a degree, like I think a lot of us can relate to. But I was like, I feel like I need a way of accessing this part of myself that feels uncertain and shy and unsure through a different framework. So, like, it's not something I ever thought I'd do. If you'd spoken to me 10 years ago, I'd be like, I couldn't even acknowledge that sex was a thing. I was a very late bloomer. I hit puberty, like, so after all my friends. But now it's sort of become something that I think because I perceived myself to really have a lot of difficulty in embracing my sexuality in that area, and it's still very much a work in progress, like I'm sure it is for most of us.
Yes.
But yeah, it felt like it was something that might offer some support that I was looking for.
So how did you make that transition from being that shy person into Tantra? Like, that seems like a big leap from one spectrum to the other. How did that all come about?
Sure. I mean, in some ways, I still feel like I am the shy person. And especially when it comes to dating, I mean, I definitely have built a lot more confidence from who I was when I was in my teens, and a lot of my work. I mean, ironically, I don't think I'm dissimilar to a lot of performers, not all, where even though I'm shy, I find performing quite liberating. And there's a strange relationship to shyness, but also loving attention and being a performer. It's like I had this experience the other day where I had to just introduce myself in front of a room full of 10 people or something, and it was like unscripted, and I like was so nervous to do that, but I'm quite happy to get up on stage and perform like my deepest, most intimate self on stage.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah. So I suppose there is still the part of me that's shy, particularly when it comes to dating and approaching men and those kinds of things. And so, but I guess there was also, to be quite honest, there was some desperation really, like, and it was just one of those strange intuitive things that, you know, maybe this is something for me. So I guess in practical terms, I Googled it. To give you a more clear answer, I Googled Tantra in Adelaide.
Right.
And I'm very close with my sisters and with my mum, actually, and I have really supportive women around me, and usually I tell them everything. But with this, I think it was one of the few things I booked into this workshop with this woman called Warata, who's amazing. I think she lives in Sydney now. And I didn't tell anyone I was going. I was so scared what they were going to make me do. Like I just signed up some kind of orgy or something. But instead it was like this amazing experience in that first workshop of just, I guess, understanding a little bit about what Tantra was. And then from there, understanding that a lot of Tantra is about relationship to yourself. So after I did this first workshop in Adelaide and didn't die of shame, and spoke to my older sister who lives in Perth, and she and I often find things at similar times. And I was like, oh my God, I've just done this workshop in Tantra and it was actually really amazing. And I think maybe there could be something that could help me there. And she's like, oh my God, I just went to a Tantra workshop in Perth. And it was quite funny. And so then through that, I became, I went and did a workshop with her teacher in Perth. Her name is Chantel Raven. Who runs the Eliyah Tantra School. They recently just changed their name to the Embodied Awakening Academy just a little while ago. And so from there, I kind of jumped into the world, and it was like petrifying, but it also felt like it was giving me a narrative around sexuality, relationships, relationship to self that I hadn't heard before. And that was really scary but exciting. And it was like, oh my God, maybe there's something here that can help me.
That's fantastic, because like you were saying before, when you first mentioned Tantra to people, there's already a preconceived notion of what that is. So it's very interesting that you have identified and explained that Tantra is a relationship with self, whereas you would assume, like you were saying before, that you'd signed up to an orgy. Like, it's very, very interesting what the exterior perception of what it is, and then when you actually delve deep into these things, that you find that they're completely different. So what have you taken out of Tantra which has really helped you in your everyday life, not just with sexuality?
Totally. I mean, I guess starting with that, it provides a framework. So I guess one of the things firstly to acknowledge is that generally our two kind of styles of sexual education is either sort of chastity, repression, I guess the kind of religious, you know, I often feel like, did I grow up a Catholic and didn't realize it? You know, like, as I had so much sexual shame, so much sexual guilt. It's not that anything explicitly kind of was fed to me in that way, but that's what I absorbed as a child, and then went, okay, sex is bad.
Yes.
Or the other education we get is this kind of pornographic, you know, as a woman, you have to be X, Y, Z, you have to look a certain way, sound a certain way in sex, and behave a certain way, and it's to reach an orgasm, and it's, you know, that is what sex is. And the way that it's portrayed in media is like a woman can, you know, reach orgasm in 30 seconds, like, well done and good luck to you if that's like, well done. And so I guess, first of all, it's like creating a narrative that actually takes the pressure off everyone, where it's not about having to reach orgasm, about having to perform, about these certain markers that we sort of have been taught is what sexuality is. And I guess the way that it has most helped me is we're always looking externally for something to satisfy us. And that can be outside sexuality. It can be in our job. It can be in our friendships. It can be in anything. It's this like seeking for external gratification or external feeding of information or what we think we need. And, you know, it can be the most confronting thing to look inwards. And various spiritual practices talk about gazing inwards. But I guess for me, at that really basic point, it's like you are going to be your closest relationship for your whole life. Like you are stuck with yourself, whether you like it or not. And, you know, it's quite shocking when I really started to feel into the way I would talk to myself and all of these different things. And my gosh, it's like a work in progress, and I have good days and bad, like everyone. But the practices for me go beyond sexuality, and it's like, how can you be your own lover? How can you be your own partner in life, have your own back, so that then if a partner comes along or somebody you're interested in, you're not just going to say yes to the next thing because you're feeling lonely or because there's a need to be in a relationship. It's like, is this what I need? Is this serving me? Am I serving the other person? You know, that kind of thing, I guess. So
do you think then, from what I'm hearing you say, did your expectations or standards shift in regards to relationships then from that experience?
Yeah. I think the other thing that I sort of realised, and it's funny, even as I'm talking now, I feel this voice in my head that's like, it's so funny that we're having this conversation. Like, I still feel like I'm an absolute, like, no idea what I'm doing in relationships, like can't flirt to save my life, miss any cues. Like, you know, it's kind of, I feel myself going into the mode of like knowing these things that I've learned, but also sometimes I feel like if I'm meeting somebody, I'm like not sure whether to mention Tantra or not. It's a bit like, well, then like the pressure that might create.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting. But yeah, and I suppose what it was for me is that, so again, to give some context, I became a model when I was 16. Again, hitting puberty late meant that I was the body type that, you know, models are. And I felt deeply uncomfortable about that. Part of me, like, again, the attention seeking, loved the spotlight, loved modeling. I ended up in Paris when I was 18, did fashion week, worked in Sydney. And so for a couple of years between high school and when I eventually came back to dance, I worked as a model, and yet was so shy. It was not at all connected to my sexuality. And some of that I think was that, you know, I hit puberty at 17. So just like hormonally, like I was just like quite a late bloomer.
Yeah.
And yet there was this thing that I started to notice, that because I was a model, there was this expectation that, one, I should be able to get any guy that I wanted, and two, I definitely should have a boyfriend because I was attractive. And you know, there was a lot of love, like there was a bit of me that got some validation out of being a model for sure, but most of it was like really confused and overwhelmed by this pressure that suddenly, you know, I was like, what must be wrong with me if I'm attractive and I'm not like getting a boyfriend? Well, then it must be something within me, or my shyness or whatever. So I suppose where Tantra came in was, first of all, it was like, well, can you love yourself if you never end up in a relationship? Like, why does a relationship have to complete you? And I still think I struggle with that, you know, like what a difficult lesson, or what a difficult story to let go of, you know, like I'm not sure I fully believe that still. Like, but no, a relationship is what you do, you know?
Yes. And where do you think that came from, Erin? Was that societal expectations, or did you have specific situations where that was directly indicated to you that that's where, as a woman, you have value if you are in a relationship?
Totally. I mean, definitely I think there's the societal stuff, what the narrative of the romance, you know, happily ever after, all of those things. I think what started to niggle at me was, though, more of those questions. I remember when I was 18 and modelling, most of the other girls I modelled with, I think, had partners or had boyfriends, and a woman that I worked with was like, are you a lesbian then? And it was like, there's nothing wrong with being a lesbian, but it was this like, well, there has to be a reason for why you're not with a man. And I just felt so much shame, not about the question, but about the fact, well, how do I answer that? Like, what is wrong with me? And I think there is this kind of, I sometimes, and look, I don't know if this is what people mean, but I feel like maybe there's a little bit of jealousy or envy or projection onto me that like, well, come on, like, you're attractive, so you should be able to get any man. And even now, like, even when I'm complaining to my girlfriends or feeling a bit lonely or whatever, like, I've only been in one relationship for 2 years and I'm 32. So the majority of my life I've been single.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people mean it as a compliment, like, oh my God, you're single? Like, how could you be single? And it's, you know, I understand the loveliness that's intended. But then I guess, like I was saying before, it's that pressure of like, well, yeah, if you're attractive, it has to be enjoyed or something. I don't know. I still probably
think it's
separate myself from the comments.
Yeah, I think it's when you get comments like that, it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, it feels like, those kind of comments. It's very interesting. I still struggle with because I was brought up Catholic, and it was very, very clear that you only have value if you are attached, if you are with somebody. And the fact that I am not married with children at 34, and I've been single for at least 5 years is a big problem, right? So it's interesting that it is still very much ingrained in the Italian. Yeah,
interesting.
And I have days where I feel like, oh fuck, I don't care. I'm very happy with where I'm at, who I am, what I'm doing with my life. I don't necessarily need that. But then there's days where I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, like, really, where the fuck is he? Like, I was ready to have kids at 21, 34. I've waited a long time, but I don't want to settle into a relationship with somebody, one, just because, and two, because I've been ready to have kids for over a decade. And I know that you're about to bring to the world your new cabaret show, which is all about fertility, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about that, because I studied fertility as part of one of my degrees as well. So I know where I'm sitting statistically with all the fertility shit. So let's talk about that while we're on that topic. We'll move away from being more valuable when you're attached, because we know that that's not true. So tell the listeners about your fertility cabaret show and how that started.
Sure. So I'm making a show called Egg. It's going to premiere at the Adelaide Fringe. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be. Like, my background is in dance. I've been studying some clown with Hugh Parham, and been more interested in, I guess, more cabaret comedy style work as well. So who knows? It was my isolation idea. So, and I guess it came out of this feeling that, I don't know whether COVID has kind of made us reflect. Like, I'm a chronically busy person. Everybody who knows me, like, I don't sit still. I find sitting still incredibly difficult. This year I was going to be traveling, touring my other show, Fam, all around the place. And so I guess in a way that busyness keeps some of those other anxieties at bay sometimes. Like, I'm aware enough to know that and ignore it. But this year it's like home life has become very in focus. Family, my sister moved back from Sydney, been spending more time with my parents. I'm not traveling. And I guess, I didn't expect to be single in 32. I don't know what I did expect, but it was like all of a sudden, I think I found out that at 35, I think this is what did it. At 35, if you're pregnant, it's referred to as a geriatric pregnancy. And I was like, oh my God, that is terrible.
Yes.
And like, I had this really angry reaction, but then it's also this thing where I feel like our generation have been told that we can be whatever we want. We can change careers, partners, polyamory, monogamy, change your career, your degree. And I'm very grateful for what that provides in some ways, but freedom is such a, high value for me. And yet biologically women's bodies, you know, are still where they've always been. And fertility-wise, as I'm sure you know more than even I do, because I've just started Googling and now all my Facebook and YouTube ads are about conception. I'm like, oh, my God, go away. It's a bit intense.
It's alarming. I was in my mid-20s when I studied. So I did youth work, science, before I did my education degree. And this is way after I did all my performing arts degrees. So I decided to study fertility. I'm very 50-50 about how happy I am that I did that, because I feel angry that I know exactly where I'm at fertility-wise, and I feel really empowered, like 50% of me feels really empowered. However, because I'm now reaching 35, the statistics are fucking horrendous. And I haven't frozen my eggs because I've been an artist, I've been a contract teacher, and you don't have a lazy $10,000 sitting on the side for you to use at your disposal. So
not at all. I did sort of wonder if I could put it in a grant at one point, but
do you know what? That'd be so fucking excellent. It'd be so excellent. It's I remember the textbook, when I opened the textbook to the fertility section, it was a human development textbook and the different stages of human development. And I highlighted from 35 plus, 50% of babies have birth defects. If the woman's 35 plus, 50 fucking percent. Now I'm not even talking about the fact that when you're 30 plus, the percentage of falling pregnant is really fucking hard. And then on top of that, 5 years later at 35, you've got the birth defects. And I'm not even going to talk about 40 plus, because that's frightening.
It's scary.
And I don't know about you, Erin, but I get really angry when guys in particular, not as angry at women because, I don't know, I give them maybe the benefit of the doubt that they haven't done their research. But when a guy says to me, oh, you've got so much time, people are having babies in their 40s. One, I ask, do you know that the majority of women who are having babies later on have frozen their eggs, and they're in a more privileged position because they're more financially stable because of XYZ, because they can freeze their eggs? And I usually get a no. It just frustrates me because a dude, and don't get me wrong, I love men, but when dudes make that comment of, oh, don't worry, you've got plenty of time, they're sitting from a very privileged standpoint. And what they don't know the majority of the time is that from 45 plus, dudes' sperm becomes defective and their sperm contributes to birth defects as well from 45 plus. And when I talk to guys about that, they're like, nah, that can't be true. Of course fucking not, because men are invincible and they don't have any defaults, just all the women. Yeah. So I don't know how you feel about all that, but I have to say I'm very 50-50. Sometimes I wish I didn't know what I know because of my study, because I am reaching that point of, well, fuck, I may not get to have kids, you know?
Totally. I mean, look, there's so much I could talk to around that. I mean, I think firstly for me, my mum was 36 when I was born and 39 when my sister was born, which in some ways I think I've realised I have a not so subconscious, it was subconscious, now it's very conscious sort of clock or thought in my own mind that if I have children, 36 is sort of, you know, when you'd want to do it by. And that I know my mum was okay with that. I guess when I started researching for this show, because, yeah, I was interested, the other instigation for making the show was I had Facebook gave me this ad about freezing my eggs. And I was like, what? Fuck off. Like, don't need to freeze my eggs. I'm young. Everyone always says you've got so much time. And I was like, why are you advertising to me to freeze my eggs? Also, you should know that I have no money. So like, backing up the wrong tree.
Motherfuckers.
Yeah. And then when I sort of started looking into it, I was like, yeah, I mean, I always knew that. And I guess, you know, from a bigger picture, I take a bit more of a philosophical approach at times of I trust that things kind of not happen at the right time, but trying not to feed too much fear into it.
Yes.
But at the same time, like being really scared. And I think for me, because I'm not even certain if I want kids, I'd always thought I would have kids. Family is one of my highest values. I'm very close with my family, especially my sister. But I guess where I've been looking at a little bit in terms of the show is I was watching a documentary actually, and this fertility doctor was saying that modern medicine is moving in all these directions about how we can support women in particular to have children at a later age. So, you know, they've got things now where they're creating these wombs that are outside of the body, these, you know, these, what's the word, not fake, but you know what I mean, like a womb that's not in the body, or all this technology that's progressing how old you can be to conceive a child and carry a child. And she was saying, like, why is that the avenue we're taking? Why aren't we looking at why younger people don't feel supported to have children? And that was like whoa, that's huge, you know, like one, financially as an artist, you know, I don't feel like I'm in a position to take that risk. And at some point, you know, if it's what I really, really wanted, then I would do whatever I had to do and probably have to not be an artist as much anymore. But it also is this thing that I think, you know, I think our generation has been given so much freedom, and it is the question of the show. Can I maintain a sense of freedom and have a child? And will I even want a sense of freedom when I have a child? But for me, you know, I'm not very good at committing to anything. I love travel. I love, you know, new things. And so there is a deep fear in me that I would be very unsatisfied if I had a child, that I would not be able to do all the things I wanted to do. You hear mothers say that all changes, and I'm sure to a degree it does. But I guess it's also that thing of, you know, we don't really cater to, I think, supporting the elderly in our society, to supporting anyone that's sort of on the edges of this youth idolizing, you know, energetic sort of model. And so, you know, I can't obviously speak to being a parent or a mother, and I know that there is, you know, there is support for parents out there, but I do wonder whether what this doctor said, it just kind of resonated with me that, like it feels like it is a scary choice in some ways. I don't know.
Very much so. I only recently had a conversation with my dad. Actually, he surprised me with this question, asking me about if I am going to freeze my eggs. And because Dad's always known that I've wanted to be a parent, I've always wanted to do that, and more so in the last probably 4 years. And it's interesting, I had one parent, my dad, who was all gung-ho about me having kids, and then I had my mum who would tell me having children and getting married, it'll destroy your life, and don't do that because then you'll be a failure. So there was no way that I could, and she's no longer in my life, so there's no way that when she was in my life that I could have gone down that road, because I was too much of a people pleaser, and therefore didn't do that because I knew it would be the utmost disappointment of my mother. But now that I'm not in that tangled web anymore, and I'm actually living my life through the way that I want to live it, basically, I'm really disappointed in myself that I didn't follow suit with that. Yes, that probably meant that I would end up being a single mum if I had a kid with one of my ex-boyfriends. But there's a real societal pressure that we as women are expected to do it all, and stay-at-home mums are still very much frowned upon in our generation. People still think, oh, well, what do you do? What do you mean? You just what? So there's so many layers to this fertility thing, to having a kid. And I know that I haven't pursued having a kid by myself in the last 5 years because I know I don't have that network of people around me that I could rely on. So many of my friends and family have either their parents that are retired or their in-laws or whatever, and they have them like 1 or 2 days a week for childcare. And I don't want to put my own kids in childcare full time because I used to work in childcare. That's another story. So I don't have that network around me. So I've thought of all the practical components of it, but I guess at some stage I have to throw all the practicality out the window and go, fuck, I really want this. I've wanted this since I was 21. Yes, I would prefer to do it with the love of my life, but he has not entered yet. So who knows? Watch this space. I can't wait to see what you're going to do with your show with fertility.
I know. It is interesting, isn't it? And look, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life in that regard.
Yeah.
Or with the show. I mean, I'm making it at the moment. I failed to mention that I dress up as a giant human egg.
Brilliant.
To put that into the mix. So I've got this
so sexy
costume, which was my way of dealing with I know. It was dealing with the confusion and I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm going to dress up as an egg. It felt like, why not?
Why not?
But it is interesting just to pick up on a couple of things that you said. In terms of bringing it back to the Tantra world again, and I guess the Tantra and the sort of that community of different ways of viewing things, I guess, like there's a few women that I have met along the way in those communities, and they're not in Adelaide, but I sort of follow them on social media, and they're really bringing back this archetype of the mother and this sort of more reverence for the mother, and also acknowledging the kind of rite of passage, which is something that I love talking about, rituals and rite of passages that are just so bereft in our kind of Western culture.
Yes.
And, the communities around these mothers, it's really acknowledging, that passagehood from maiden to mother. And, as a society, we do still kind of value the maiden, the young, fresh, innocent, or whatever it is, archetype, but that transition to mother as, not only the sort of narrative of stay-at-home mum failing in their life, but there's a lot of narratives of the mother in different traditions who's this fierce, protector, lioness, or who is this sort of well of unconditional love. And so I think I'm interested in those kinds of archetypes as well in the work that I do that kind of help you access, I guess, an energy that I guess it's a lot about retelling the stories we've been told and seeing them in a new light somehow.
So I love what you said about the lioness there and the fierce protector. What culture do you think that comes from? Because it's definitely not Western society. Where do you think that?
That's an interesting question. I always end up managing to make conversations come back to ritual and these kinds of practices. I mean, Tantra obviously comes from, or maybe not obviously, but comes from India, comes from, there's Tantra that is Hindu, there's Tantra from the Taoist practices, there's some Buddhist Tantra, and there's a whole bunch of other offshoots, but it is very connected to Indian deities, Indian mythology and those kinds of things. So there is the goddess Kali, who is the destroyer, who goes into the underworld, who is her images that depict her. She's standing on a pile of skulls. Her tongue is, poking out, and she's fierce. It's like, imagine embodying that energy, and Durga is another one who rides this lion, and she's another protector. Then you've got the archetypes of Lakshmi, who's more that mother energy. Sarasvati is Lakshmi is abundance. Saraswati is more artistic expression, creativity, the voice. And then you've got Parvati, who's the mother, and she is this, overflowing well of unconditional love. And I've been doing a lot of research more recently into more Celtic mythology, Celtic rituals, deities, those things, because I suppose for me, I crave I think the artist storyteller in me craves these kinds of stories. I often took myself to church in my late teens and early 20s because I just felt like I wanted somewhere where you could sit quietly in reverence that wasn't the football or, those kinds of things, and feel a sense of connection to other people. But then they would always mention God, and I'd be like, damn it. Why do you have to mention God? I liked the frankincense. I even like the organ. I like the singing. I like that we're all gathering. We're not drinking. We're not, but you're mentioning. And still places of reverence, for me, I crave, I run a lot of women's circles with my sister where we create full moon, new moon ceremonies. And I guess regardless of what they are, it's a place to come into a space of reverence, of community where you are connected to each other. So there is archetypes in the Celtic pantheon as well of these different sort of female archetypes, from the maiden to the mother to the warrior. Athena, she, would have the bow and arrow. There's, and so I guess those stories maybe aren't front and center, or we have different narratives around what femininity, masculinity, motherhood, fatherhood, and all those different things are. And I don't know if they're necessarily empowering.
I totally agree with that. In fact,
I think they're not.
When Cullen was on the podcast, we were talking about female and male energy and how there's a yin and yang in both female and male energy. And I'd love to hear your take on both of those energies and how they work in harmony instead of against each other like we are indoctrinated to believe.
Well, I'm glad you raised this, because I guess one of the things that is, again, a core teaching of Tantra is around duality. So Tantra means to join.
Right.
To weave, to join. And so everything is duality, but also coming together as oneness. And so they, talk about the masculine and the feminine, which is within everyone and everything, like yin and yang. And I guess it's really important to see masculine and feminine as different to male and female, and the gender connotations that we now attribute to those things. People create sort of different language around that works them. And I know gender can be quite a layered conversation, especially at the moment with, the conversations around that I think are really important. But to honour the tradition of Tantra that I study, it's this idea of the masculine and the feminine that's within everyone. And so generally people that identify mainly as a feminine bodied person tend to be most strong in their feminine essence. People that tend to identify most strongly in their bodies and their spirits as being masculine tend to have a masculine essence. And so that's where that sort of plays out. But I suppose there's a lot I could say about that. I do a lot of work around my internal masculine and feminine, and that inner union, it's called. So the inner relationship between my inner masculine and my inner feminine. I guess really summarizing the kind of tantric view of that, the masculine is space holding, it's presence, it's safety. The masculine can kind of go to the void. Men often, and I guess I am going now into gender stereotypes. So, bear with me with that. But, the masculine can tend to go into the void and just be like, I just don't want to talk. I don't want to think. And like in hetero relationships, the woman will often come home and be like, but this happened and this happened, blah, 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 blah. And, the masculine can kind of just be like emptiness. Whereas the feminine is, that creative radiance, energy, kind of heart-centered communication, those kinds of things. And so I guess for me, being a straight person, and so my relationship dynamics tend to be between, the feminine and the masculine, which actually most relationships, even in same sex or other dynamics, there tends to be somebody that holds the masculine pole and the feminine pole. There's this sort of polarity, not always, but generally that seems to be where sexual chemistry is most potent.
Yes.
And so, I guess I see that at the personal relationship level of understanding my relationship to my own femininity, which I definitely as a woman actually, I think when I found sexuality difficult or challenging, I kind of went the opposite way and became a businesswoman and hid my sexuality and really stepped into my masculine, actually. You know, I worked all the time, and any practices that was like lighting some candles and having a bath or engaging with my feminine, I was like, bleh. Just want to keep working. Like any kind of, you know, the masculine purpose and doing. And I think for a lot of women, that's, you know, is a side effect of women now working, nurturing that feminine side of us, which needs softness and time and stillness and, you know, all of those things. But then the other thing I think is that as a society, we're all kind of in this strange time of talking about toxic masculinity, which is really important and such an important conversation that has needed to be had and is being had. But I also think maybe at even another level, I worry for the next generation of men around this idea of toxic masculinity and relating that to being male. I think that toxic masculinity generally does happen with males, and I think for the safety implications, you know, that can be so awful. But also I think we're all living in a hyper masculine world with masculinity being the driving force, and we don't really embrace femininity beyond gender. But, you know, we don't embrace sitting still, we don't embrace all of those different things that come with the feminine. So that might have been a bit of a rant, but it's something that I think about a lot and still sort of try and articulate within myself, and is also why I do these practices like women's circles and things, to kind of connect with that energy a bit more.
That was really brilliant, Erin. That was really good. And just when you were talking about the whole focusing and work, and being in the masculine part of yourself, and anything soft and feminine and vulnerable, and I so resonate with that. I so resonate with that.
Yeah.
I feel very much that I have to remind myself, and I think maybe it's because of life experiences that I've had, that I feel like I have to stay in the masculine vibe to protect myself.
Mm-hmm,
and
totally.
I don't know how or when I'm going to find that balance, because the fear for me is if I say, for example, pull the volume down on the masculine and bring the volume up on the feminine, straight away as I'm saying this to you, I'm thinking, fuck, that leaves me open to danger. So how does one feel safe in a balance of energy, or even more feminine energy than masculine? Like, even like I just said, even saying these things to you, I'm like, oh, even saying that change in, you know, focus makes me go fuckity fuck. Like, it's just, yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Oh, totally. And so look, I guess I do a lot of one-on-one sessions with people around this stuff as well. And so, you know, the first thing is to acknowledge that fear. And if there has been previous situations that have caused you to feel fear, then it's like we spend so much time avoiding that. So the first thing would be, you know, if I'm speaking to you, but also to general, you know, would be either through a supported situation or on your own, acknowledge that that fear is there. It's like fear and trauma. So it's like this idea of this beach ball in water, and we spend all our time trying to keep it under the water. And then the more you do that, the stronger, you know, when kids are in the pool and the ball just pops up out of the water and they're like, oh, you know. So I guess the first thing is acknowledging that fear. And look, I mean, the history of the feminine, you know, being abused and unsafe by the masculine is huge. It's, you know, not just our lifetime, but the whole history of women not feeling safe. I mean, that's an embodied thing in our cells. And a lot of Tantra is actually coming out of the mind and into the body, because the body carries that fear. So it's like, definitely allow yourself to acknowledge that it's fucking scary, and that being feminine is like, that's scary. And then I think that practices that you can do just on your own. You know, like I do spend, despite my teachers gentle, not so gentle, encouraging, telling me, you know, advice to spend more time in my feminine, I still avoid it. And I teach this now. It's like, I'd much rather just actually, if it's all right, answer all my emails and write a new grant. And like, it's this constant battle with myself because I don't feel as comfortable in the feminine. But it's a bit like when you finally go to bed early and your body's like, thank you. Like, I've been screaming at you that I'm tired for weeks, and you finally went to bed early and you're like, oh, it's like an exhale. And so for me, I like, don't do it as often, but it's, you know, I think it can look whatever it needs to look like for you, but just do it in your own space, giving yourself permission to feel into your heart, to express whatever sadness, grief, joy is there. To, you know, we've all been like self-pleasure, but not necessarily for orgasm, self-touch, self-soothing. Like, it feels strange at first because you're like, oh, am I just lonely and can't find anyone to touch me? But like, when do you actually just touch yourself and be present with what that is? And often when you engage with the feminine, there is a lot of suppressed emotion there because you haven't felt it. And so I guess this work supports people to feel safe. And like, there is, and you know, it's funny because I kind of bridge between two worlds. I am so in the spiritual world and love all of that. And then I also spend a lot of time in the arts world, and they're not that disconnected. But sometimes I even notice my own language, and it's, you know, but I think it's like just being with yourself in the feminine, seeing what that brings up and holding yourself in that can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Incredibly confronting. I can see your face. For the listeners, you're looking at me like nodding, but you're like, no. Yes, no, which is how I still feel at times.
Yeah, I think there's so many layers to what you just said. For me personally, I used to be better than I am now at allowing myself to sit in the feminine. The reason being is that my mum, like I said, who's no longer in my life, she was very woo-woo, like as in crystals, meditation, classes, all that kind of stuff, and clairvoyance and all that, like I felt to the nth degree, right? So I was introduced to that at a young age, and I was open to it. Now then, when the situation happened where my mum was no longer in my life, I shut that off because I did not want to be like her. Because all those things to me were, no, that's what your mum was. That's not what you are. And there's a whole lot of other things that I had to deal with, like my inner dialogue, which I realized was my mum's, not mine, all that kind of stuff.
Huge, yeah.
And that, again, I think was a self-protection thing. No, I'm not going to touch that stuff. So when I'm hearing you say that, intellectually I know that would be very helpful for me, but then it goes straight back to but no, you don't want to be like your mother. So it's like there's this multitude of, yes, I'm complex people. Like, if you haven't worked that out now, then you probably haven't been listening to very many episodes.
And look, we all are. You're probably just admitting it in public. You know, I'm sure everybody listening has their own version of it. It's just we don't talk about this stuff that much, really.
Correct. And I think it is so useful and so helpful, and something that I know I need to start taking small steps back into, not finding myself, because I think I have done a lot of work on working out who I am, where I'm comfortable. And I feel like my standards and boundaries have gotten really good over the last 4 or 5 years, but there's still a lot of work to be done on the feminine side.
Totally. And look, I'm sure I could really relate to this. There is another kind of archetype, and I'm sort of throwing a lot of things out there.
No, it's good. It's good.
Dynamic of the love avoider and the love addict. So while there's the masculine feminine polarity, there also is this dynamic of a polarity that attracts each other, where you tend to have a love addict, the chaser.
Yes.
The generally is the feminine, and then you have the love avoider, which is generally the masculine, who wants freedom and just wants to bliss out, and the feminine love addict wants everybody to love her, and I need you to be messaging me now and more and more and more and more, and don't make me sit on my own, I need connection.
Yes.
And look, everybody probably experiences a range of relationship dynamics where they're on some part of that spectrum. I was definitely in the love avoider category. Even the way I dressed was very masculine. Like, I'm not, I remember my first Tantra retreat with Chantel Raven. She explained this concept to us, and she said, those of you that think you're a love addict, put your hand up. Those of you that think you're a love avoider, when she'd explained it. And all of the love addicts had their hair curled, they're in beautiful dresses, they were like so just like loving and open. And then there was about 7 of us, because this was an all-female class, so generally women are love addicts. Or in that sort of spectrum. There was a few of us wearing Birkenstocks, leggings, hair back in a practical ponytail with a notepad ready to take notes. Thank you very much. And like, I'm here to take part in the workshop. And it was like quite a shocking moment for me, because I thought I was quite feminine because I'm a dancer and a musician, and people are like, you're so feminine. But actually, like, I don't really enjoy getting dressed up. Like, I think modeling killed that for me, but also I'm like really just into practical things. And part of my feminine practice is taking time in the morning to adorn myself, not because I'm prescribing to beauty expectations, but because it actually can feel nice to think I'm worth it. I'm going to take time.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's quite an interesting one. And so, I think why I said that was that as women, it's really important that we have embodied our boundaries and our no. But often if we've been hurt, or if there's any number of situations, that is actually a protective wall that is less helpful. And like, I've been told I have such a strong energetic no to any man that even looks at me. It's like, and then I'm like, why does the man ever want me? And it's like, my energy is just like, fuck off. Don't get within 6 meters of me. I feel like I need to say, you're pointing at yourself. Just owning you up here. And then we perpetuate this idea that nobody wants us, and like, we're really open to everyone, but like, my radar for unavailable men that are leaving the country the next day, all these different men, it's
same.
So I can feel a love addict for a moment, and I can say to the universe, my friends, myself, see, you tried, but like, I know that I'm picking a man that's not available. If a man turned up on my front door and was like, I am here for you, Erin, I'd be like, run a million miles. I try not to be like that, because I have done a lot of work on that over the last few years, but that is still my initial impulse. So I suppose like, it's that thing, coming back to the masculine and the feminine, it's like, we don't have to only be in our feminine and go no to the masculine, and also being just in the masculine is not helpful, but they actually do have an inner relationship which is reflective of the outer relationship. So again, without getting too woo-woo and into the kind of conceptual mental things, it's like, I guess part of the end goal is, how can you integrate that relationship so that you feel you're masculine? So when you need that masculine and you need to say no to someone, it's like, there is no certainty. It's like clear no. But when you're around a guy that you're attracted to, I mean, I'm a classic for collaborating with men that I'm attracted to, so I'm completely coming to them in my masculine, and then 6 months later I'm like, but why aren't we in a relationship? We're just doing work together. And then I'm like, fuck, you haven't flirted with them once. Like, you can't change that now. The whole way you interact is like via email. Like, what did you think? Yeah. So that was some interesting reflection. So integrating those two. Yeah.
We have a lot in common, Erin. We have a lot in common. Yes.
There you go.
Very interesting. If you subscribe on patreon.com/thecatchlorettepod, you get early access to episodes, not to mention keeping the pod alive for as little as $1 a month. Subscribe now. Patreon.com/thecatchlorettepod. Before I love and leave you, do you have any extra insightful pieces of deliciousness for the listener?
Look, I mean, it's a pleasure to talk about these things. I think it's like one of the things about Tantra that I keep coming back to is like, it's not just the light. So we don't have to be perfect at things. And the more we can embrace the fact that we feel awkward and uncomfortable and scared and envious and impatient and sad, the more you can also then feel those other beautiful feelings as well. So I guess I say that to myself and to others as well. And that, you know, that seems to do quite well.
Thank you so much for this evening. I have absolutely fucking loved it. It's been a mirror to me as well throughout this conversation. Not only have I
still feel like you look a bit shocked. like I reach out.
The Catchalorette with friends near and far, from heartache to catfish and sex toys. The Catchalorette and friends. See you next time if you dare.
Bank of the West is offering the 1% for the Planet checking account. It gives back 1% of the account's net revenue to the planet at no cost to you. There's no monthly service charge with any deposit per statement, and there's no minimum balance required. The 1% for the Planet checking account, only from Bank of the West. Learn more at bankofthewest.com/1%. Additional conditions apply. Member FDIC.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.